On a bright afternoon in Chicago, a racist cop picks the wrong target. A black woman who seems like just another bystander. What he doesn't know? She's actually an undercover FBI agent. When he tries to use force, he's about to get the shock of his life. How will she respond to his abuse of power? And will justice finally be served? Watch until the end to find out. And don't forget to subscribe. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Chicago. On a scorching summer afternoon, sunlight reflected off the towering skyscrapers, bouncing off the glass windows of cars, slowly rolling through the busy intersections. In the city's central plaza, people enjoyed their break. Some sipped on iced coffee while lounging on park benches. Others paused to watch street performers captivating passers-by. At the edge of the plaza, a black man in a blue delivery uniform stood near an office building, scrolling through his phone. Marcus Hill, a food delivery driver, had just completed an order for a customer on the 10th floor and was checking his next route. Before he could confirm his next stop, a sharp voice rang out behind him. "What are you doing here?" Marcus turned around, startled. Standing before him was a towering white police officer, hands on his hips, his stance exuding authority. Bradley Pierce, a cop with a notorious reputation in the area, known for harassing people who, in his eyes, didn't belong. "I'm just checking my next delivery, officer," Marcus replied calmly, raising his phone slightly to show he was working. Pierce narrowed his eyes. "This is an office district, not a hangout spot. Let me see your ID." Marcus frowned. "I'm just doing my job. I literally just delivered food. You can check the restaurant system if you want." "I'm not asking about your order. I'm asking for your ID." Pierce's voice grew colder, his tone edged with intimidation. Not far away, Jasmine Carter sat on a bench, quietly observing. As an FBI agent, she had developed a keen ability to recognize trouble before it escalated. The moment her eyes landed on Pierce, her instincts kicked in. This wasn't a routine check. Marcus glanced around, clearly feeling the injustice, but hesitant to argue. Jasmine knew she couldn't stay silent. She placed her soda can down, stood up, and walked toward them. "Excuse me, but is there a problem here?" Her voice was calm but assertive. Pierce turned to face her, his expression instantly irritated. "Who are you? And why are you butting in?" Jasmine didn't blink. "Just a concerned citizen, watching what seems to be an unnecessary interrogation." Pierce let out a scoff, his smirk dripping with condescension. "You need to mind your own business before you get yourself in trouble." Jasmine crossed her arms, unfazed. "Or maybe you can explain why a food delivery worker needs to show his ID when he hasn't done anything wrong." The tension in the air thickened. Nearby, people started noticing the interaction, their conversations pausing as they listened in. Pierce's jaw clenched. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by a black woman standing her ground. Jasmine could feel it. The shift. The moment when things could either de-escalate or explode. And she knew. This was only the beginning. The air in the plaza had changed. What had been a peaceful afternoon was now tinged with tension. A few feet away, people slowed their steps, their curiosity piqued by the exchange between Officer Bradley Pierce, Marcus Hill, and the woman who had just inserted herself into the conversation, Jasmine Carter. Pierce squared his shoulders, his hands tightening at his belt. He was not used to being questioned, and certainly not by a black woman who wasn't afraid to look him in the eye. "I don't owe you an explanation, lady," Pierce sneered, his voice laced with irritation. "Step back and let me do my job." Jasmine raised an eyebrow. "Your job? Funny, I wasn't aware your job was intimidating people trying to earn an honest living." Marcus, standing between them, shifted uneasily. His instincts told him to keep his head down. He had seen situations like this spiral out of control before. He had no criminal record, no reason to be afraid. But that didn't mean he wouldn't end up handcuffed, or worse, if Pierce decided to escalate. "Listen, man," Marcus said cautiously. "I'm not looking for trouble. I've got work to do. Just let me be on my way." But Pierce wasn't listening. His eyes were locked on Jasmine now, irritation flashing into something darker, anger. He hated being challenged, especially in front of a growing crowd. "Last warning. Walk away," Pierce growled. Jasmine didn't move. She could feel the weight of the moment, the eyes of the bystanders watching, waiting to see what would happen next, and she knew she had to stand her ground. "Or what?" Jasmine asked, her tone steady. Pierce's jaw tightened. He took a step forward, his body looming over hers. "You think you're tough. You think you can mouth off to a cop and walk away." His voice dropped to a low threat. "I can take you in for obstruction right now." Jasmine remained calm, but she felt the heat rising inside her. The blatant abuse of power, the way Pierce's body language screamed dominance and intimidation. She had seen this before. "Obstruction?" she repeated, tilting her head. "You're making up charges now?" Pierce smirked. "Keep pushing, and you'll see just how real those charges can get." The bystanders murmured among themselves. A few pulled out their phones. Recording had begun. Marcus clenched his fists, his frustration bubbling. "Man, come on. I didn't do anything." Pierce turned his gaze back to him. "I said, show me your ID." Marcus let out a short, humorless laugh. "For what? Delivering food? You afraid of a guy carrying a bag of burgers?" Pierce's face darkened. "Smart mouth, huh? Maybe a night in jail will wipe that grin off your face." And then, without warning, he grabbed Marcus's arm. Marcus jerked back instinctively. "Hey, what the hell?" Jasmine moved, fast. Her training kicked in before she had time to think. She stepped between them, her hand raised in a clear sign of authority. "That's enough." The command was sharp, firm, the kind of voice that made people stop and listen. Pierce hesitated, his grip tightening on Marcus. His eyes flicked to Jasmine, narrowing. "You got 5 seconds to step aside, lady," he warned. Jasmine didn't blink. Instead, she reached into her blazer and pulled out her badge. The golden FBI emblem glinted under the sunlight. A hush fell over the crowd. Marcus's eyes widened. Pierce stiffened. For a split second, he faltered. Then his expression twisted into something ugly. "FBI?" he scoffed, taking a step back. "So what? You think that gives you the right to interfere in police business?" Jasmine's lips curved into a slow, knowing smile. "Actually, yeah. That's exactly what it means." A few people in the crowd let out quiet murmurs. The dynamic had shifted. Pierce's fingers twitched. His pride had been wounded, and he didn't take humiliation lightly. "You think you're special because of that badge?" he spat. "You think you can walk into my city, into my jurisdiction, and tell me how to do my damn job?" Jasmine's expression didn't waver. "I think I can tell you when you're violating someone's civil rights, and right now you are way out of line." Pierce's nostrils flared. The crowd was growing larger, phones still pointed at him. He could feel the weight of the attention, the pressure of the moment. His next move would define everything. Would he back down, or would he double down? His pride answered for him. With zero hesitation, he threw a punch, aimed directly at Jasmine's face. And in that instant, everything changed. The moment Officer Bradley Pierce's fist shot forward, time seemed to slow. But Jasmine Carter had been trained for moments like this. She shifted her weight just slightly, pivoting on her heel, and Pierce's punch whiffed through empty air. His momentum carried him forward, off balance, vulnerable. Jasmine moved in an instant. With fluid precision, she grabbed his wrist, twisted his arm at an angle that sent a sharp jolt of pain through his shoulder, and in one smooth motion, she flipped him onto the pavement. Thud. The sound of his body hitting the ground echoed through the plaza. For a split second, there was silence. Then, a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. People stepped closer, phones held high, recording every second. The energy in the plaza had shifted. This wasn't just an argument anymore. This was a moment of reckoning. Pierce groaned, his face twisted in a mixture of pain and pure rage. He hadn't expected her to fight back. He certainly hadn't expected her to win. Marcus Hill took a cautious step back, stunned. "Damn. Did you just—" Jasmine didn't answer. Her eyes stayed locked on Pierce as he struggled to push himself up from the pavement, his pride more wounded than his body. "You're gonna regret that," he snarled, his breath ragged. Jasmine arched an eyebrow. "Funny. I was about to say the same to you." Pierce's hand shot toward his belt, his radio. "Officer down. Backup needed. Violent suspect attacked me." He barked into the device, his voice shaking with fury. Jasmine took a step forward, her voice calm but firm. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Officer Pierce." Pierce's nostrils flared. "Oh, yeah? And why the hell not?" Jasmine tilted her head toward the growing crowd. "Because I'm not the suspect here. You are." Pierce glanced around, and for the first time, he truly saw what was happening. Dozens of phones recording, dozens of eyes watching, and every single person had seen exactly how this went down. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He wasn't the victim. He was the aggressor. And now, he was trapped. But his pride was too strong to let him back down. With a furious grunt, he lunged at Jasmine again. This time she was ready. She sidestepped smoothly, grabbed his arm, and twisted it behind his back in one swift motion. She pressed him down onto the pavement, his face inches from the ground. "Stay down." Her voice was low, steady, not angry, not triumphant, just controlled. Pierce thrashed, but it was useless. He was completely overpowered. You can't do this. I'm a cop," he sputtered, his face red with humiliation. Jasmine leaned in slightly. "Then, act like one." The crowd murmured louder. Someone in the back cheered. Marcus, still in shock, pulled out his phone. "Man, this is gonna be all over the internet in like 5 minutes." Pierce froze. That's when he truly realized. This wasn't just about the people watching in person. This was going viral. And suddenly, everything he had worked so hard to maintain, his authority, his reputation, his control, was slipping right through his fingers. Sirens blared in the distance. The sound of approaching police units filled the air. Jasmine slowly released her grip, standing up as multiple squad cars screeched to a halt nearby. Officers poured out, their hands near their holsters, their eyes bouncing between Jasmine, Pierce, and the recording crowd. "Everyone calm down," one officer called out, his voice uncertain. "What's going on here?" Pierce, still on the ground, pointed a shaking finger at Jasmine. "She assaulted an officer. Arrest her." Jasmine didn't flinch. Instead, she pulled out her FBI badge once more, letting the golden emblem catch the light. The officers hesitated. One of them, a young cop, maybe in his mid-20s, visibly paled when he saw the badge. "Wait, she's FBI?" Another officer, an older sergeant, stepped forward. He looked down at Pierce, then at Jasmine, then at the sea of recording phones. He sighed. "We should check the footage first." Pierce's face drained of color. "You don't need footage. She, she attacked me. The young cop glanced around nervously. Uh, from what I can see, sir, it looks like she was defending herself. Pierce's breath hitched. He shook his head. No, you don't understand. She... Jasmine took a step forward, her voice cold, controlled. You did this to yourself, Officer Pierce. And for once, you don't get to control the story. Silence. The older sergeant turned to another officer. Get his badge and his weapon. Internal Affairs is gonna want a word with him. The crowd erupted into murmurs and cheers. Pierce's world was crumbling around him, and all he could do was sit there, his hands clenched into fists, watching as everything slipped away. Jasmine exhaled slowly, scanning the faces around her. She wasn't victorious. She wasn't celebrating. This wasn't about her. This was about justice finally catching up to the people who thought they were above it. She turned to Marcus, who still looked stunned. You okay? Marcus let out a shaky breath. Yeah, I think so. I can't believe this actually happened. Jasmine nodded. Believe it, and make sure people see the truth. He held up his phone. The recording was still rolling. Trust me, they will. The energy in the plaza was electric. The moment Officer Bradley Pierce had been subdued by Jasmine Carter, the once idle spectators had become an engaged audience. Phones were still recording, their cameras capturing every angle of the moment that could no longer be buried under an official report. More police officers arrived, their squad cars forming a perimeter around the scene. Some looked hesitant, glancing between Pierce, humiliated on the ground, and Jasmine, standing tall, with her FBI badge gleaming in the afternoon sun. A senior officer stepped forward. Lieutenant Harold Dixon, a man known for being measured but firm. His gaze flickered to the crowd, recognizing that this was no longer just an internal matter. Too many people had already seen what happened. Too many people were still watching. He sighed, running a hand over his bald head, before his eyes landed on Pierce. What the hell happened here? Pierce, still fuming, scrambled to his feet. She assaulted me, he barked, pointing a shaking finger at Jasmine. She resisted. She attacked an officer. She needs to be in cuffs right now. Jasmine didn't react. She simply exhaled, tilting her head slightly before speaking. You sure you want to go down that road, Officer Pierce? Dixon narrowed his eyes. Carter, is it? Jasmine flipped her badge open, holding it up for him to see. Special Agent Jasmine Carter, FBI. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. A few people gasped, others exchanged looks. The fact that Pierce had tried to take down a federal agent without realizing it was already damning enough. Dixon's lips pressed into a thin line. He turned to another officer nearby. Tell me we have this on camera. The younger officer hesitated. Then, as if realizing the inevitable, he gestured toward the crowd. We don't, but they do. A wave of realization washed over Dixon's face. He turned back to Pierce, his jaw tightening. You're telling me, he started, voice low and controlled, that we just had an officer use excessive force against an unarmed citizen, then attack a federal agent, and the entire damn thing was recorded? Pierce's face turned red. She provoked me. She was interfering with my arrest. Dixon held up a hand, silencing him. His eyes flicked toward Jasmine. You got anything to say before I call Internal Affairs? Jasmine gestured toward Marcus, who still held his phone up. Actually, sir, I don't need to say anything. The footage speaks for itself. Dixon let out a slow breath, his eyes scanning the gathered onlookers. The reality was settling in. There was no covering this up. A few officers shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other. Some of them had worked alongside Pierce for years, had followed his lead in incidents that never made it into official reports. Now, though, now they saw the writing on the wall. One of the younger cops, maybe in his mid-20s, spoke up, his voice uncertain. "Lieutenant, we all saw what happened." He swallowed, shifting on his feet. "She didn't do anything wrong." Pierce turned on him, his face twisted in betrayal. "What the hell are you saying? You're siding with her." The officer hesitated, but then his gaze hardened. "I'm siding with the truth." The crowd reacted immediately, murmurs rising. A few people even cheered softly. The moment was shifting. Dixon exhaled sharply. Then he nodded. "Pierce, hand over your badge and weapon. You're relieved of duty pending an internal investigation." Pierce froze. "You're suspending me?" Dixon's expression was blank. "I don't have a choice. Not after this." The young officer stepped forward, pulling a plastic evidence bag from his belt. Pierce jerked away, as if physically recoiling, but Dixon's gaze remained steady. "Badge, now." Slowly, reluctantly, Pierce unclipped his badge from his uniform and tossed it into the bag. His weapon followed soon after. The crowd was silent, watching, waiting. Jasmine, standing off to the side, finally allowed herself to breathe. Marcus, still standing near her, shook his head. "I never thought I'd see the day." Jasmine glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "It's not over yet." Marcus frowned. "What do you mean? The guy's done, right?" Jasmine's gaze swept across the other officers, the ones who had stood by silently as Pierce abused his power, the ones who had looked the other way for years. She knew Pierce wasn't the only problem. He was just a symptom of something bigger. "One man losing his badge doesn't fix the system," she said softly. "It just proves the system is broken." Marcus let out a slow breath, as if he was just beginning to understand. Meanwhile, Dixon turned toward Jasmine. His tone was quieter now, less defensive. "I'll be in touch, Agent Carter." Jasmine nodded. "You should be." The sirens had faded, but the weight of what had happened lingered in the air. The city had just witnessed something rare. A cop held accountable in real time. But Jasmine knew. The real fight was just beginning. The plaza was still buzzing with energy, whispers and murmurs rippling through the crowd as Officer Bradley Pierce was led away, his badge and weapon surrendered. Jasmine Carter watched as two officers escorted him toward a squad car, his face a mask of rage and humiliation. His world had crumbled in front of everyone, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Marcus Hill, still holding his phone, shook his head in disbelief. "Man, this is actually happening." Jasmine turned to him, her expression steady but knowing. "It had to happen." Marcus exhaled, looking at the crowd. "Yeah, but usually it doesn't. Cops like him, they get away with this kind of thing all the time." Jasmine glanced toward the younger officers standing nearby, still watching the scene unfold. Some looked uncomfortable, others thoughtful. No, the moment had shaken them too. "Not this time," she said simply. Nearby, Lieutenant Dixon spoke quietly to one of his sergeants. His gaze flicked toward Jasmine, then to the crowd. He knew that this wasn't going to just disappear, not with all the cameras, not with all the witnesses. Finally, he stepped forward and addressed the officers. "We'll be conducting a full review, effective immediately." The statement sent a ripple through the gathering. But Jasmine didn't react. She had done what she came to do. Marcus turned back to her, a newfound respect in his eyes. "So, what happens now?" Jasmine tucked her badge back into her jacket. "Now, we make sure this never happens again." And with that, the first step toward real justice had been taken. 1 week later, the city plaza felt different. The same people who had once walked past without a second thought now lingered, exchanging knowing looks, their conversations filled with a renewed sense of awareness. Marcus Hill stood near the same spot where his life had nearly taken a different turn, watching the news play on a store's television screen. Footage of Officer Pierce's arrest had gone viral, making national headlines. "Disgraced officer suspended pending investigation," the caption read. Below it, a commentator spoke. "This case is sparking new discussions about racial profiling and police accountability. Public pressure is mounting for major policy changes." Marcus shook his head. "Never thought I'd see the day." From behind him, a voice spoke. "Believe it." He turned to see Jasmine Carter, standing with her hands in her pockets, watching the screen. Marcus let out a dry laugh. "You always just pop up like that?" Jasmine smirked. "Only when necessary." The screen changed, showing a press conference with city officials. Among them was Lieutenant Dixon, announcing new reforms, mandatory body cam policies, stricter oversight for officers with excessive force complaints. Jasmine nodded. "It's a start." Marcus exhaled. "Think it'll stick?" Jasmine didn't hesitate. "Not unless we make sure it does." Just then, a little black girl nearby stared at Jasmine, eyes wide with admiration. She tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mom, is she a superhero?" Jasmine met the little girl's eyes and smiled. Maybe not a superhero, but she had done what needed to be done. And now, the fight for justice was just beginning. This story is more than just an intense confrontation. It's a mirror to reality. It reflects the importance of standing up to injustice, knowing our rights, and using our voices to demand accountability. One of the most critical takeaways is the power of recording and witnessing. In today's digital age, video evidence can be the difference between a false report and the truth being exposed. We've seen time and time again how injustices are swept under the rug until the public holds people accountable. If you witness wrongdoing, document it, speak up, and don't look away. Another lesson is the role of bystanders. Jasmine Carter could have walked away, but she chose to act. It's easy to assume someone else will step in, but change starts with individuals who refuse to stay silent. This story also reminds us that one bad officer isn't the problem. The system that enables them is. True justice isn't about removing one corrupt cop. It's about demanding reforms that prevent abuses from happening in the first place. So, what can we do? Stay informed, speak up, support policies that promote police accountability. Because justice only happens when people refuse to accept anything less. Today's story isn't just about a confrontation between an FBI agent and a corrupt cop. It's a powerful reminder that justice doesn't happen on its own. It takes people who are willing to stand up. If you witnessed an injustice like this, what would you do? Would you bravely speak up, record the situation, and fight for what's right, 1? Or would you stay silent and avoid getting involved to protect yourself, 2? Drop a comment with 1 or 2 below. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and don't forget to like and subscribe to help spread these important stories.